the trading relationship during the period that relationships have been soured has gone from strength to strength. I mean, the bilateral trade volume's over $221 billion now. It's almost double what it was in 2016 when Malcolm Turnbull, the last Australian Prime Minister, visited China. And it's three times what it was when I finished as ambassador a decade ago. And at that time, you could not imagine it would have been any bigger. So the trading relationship has continued to go to strength. There have been some specific industries that have been affected by China's trade measures against Australia: wine, lobster, lumber, coal. We know about those, and they will snap back to what they were and be even bigger than what they were. So, on the trading side, it is going to go continue to go from strength to strength. In terms of the atmosphere of the bilateral relationship, I think that we have now moved into a period of normalisation, that we've been through stabilisation, I think very well managed by Prime Minister Albanese and Foreign Minister Wong. But with this visit to Beijing by the Prime Minister, we now have basically a normal relationship.
Why is this happening now? Is it because of China's slowing economy or thirst for Australia's critical minerals?
No, look, I think it's a broader picture that China has been through a period in which it's exercised its diplomacy more assertively than we've ever experienced before. I think it's seen that assertive or so-called wolf warrior diplomacy has actually done it a lot of damage in terms of how it manages relationships with other countries. And I think that it sees fixing up this bilateral relationship with Australia as an important part of getting its position internationally sorted out in a much more constructive way than they have pursued in the last few years. So fixing up the Australia issue from a Beijing perspective is part of fixing up a broader foreign policy problem that they've had for some time.
Will trade be the first casualty if political differences on international security, espionage or any other issues can't be managed?
Well, not necessarily. As I said, I mean, if you look at the period from 2016 to now, our trade with China has boomed, despite the great difficulties in the relationship. So I don't think it's a sort of one-to-one proposition. It's not that direct. And I think that whilst we will have difficult times in the bilateral relationship with China, I think we can look forward to continuing strong growth in our commercial relations.
We are still waiting for announcements in relation to the wine, seafood and beef sectors. Do you think Australian businesses will respond cautiously to the opening up, perhaps considering a China plus one strategy as a way of de-risking?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing of the last few years, it's taught Australian businesses to use the old cliche, not to put all your eggs in one basket. But in some sectors, and wine is probably the most obvious one, the strength, the size, the demand from China is so compelling that I think no matter what effort goes into so-called diversification, you'll find that a trade starts to flow heavily back in the direction of China. So take the case for wine. Australian wine producers have done a great job trying to diversify into, say, Southeast Asia. But every market in Southeast Asia is separate. It's different. There's different regulations, there's different tastes, there's different customs, there's different distribution systems. With China, you've got 1.4 billion people, a middle class of 300 million people who are prepared to pay top dollar for brand wines, and it's one regulatory environment, one market of that size. So that's just the commercial reality. And I think many exporters from Australia who have tried to diversify from China have come up against this fundamental commercial reality, and it's not going to go away. So again, we have to learn to live with that. Not only is there profound complementarity between Australia and China, but that there's no other market that's a single market of the scale of China anywhere in the world.
If this is indeed a normalisation, is it appropriate that in the longer term China joined the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we need to be very clear, as we had been for many decades in our policy with respect to China, is that we seek to engage China in all the multilateral, regional, plurilateral arrangements in order to constrain and shape their policies and to make them, if you like, a more constructive participant in the international system. And so the Comprehensive Trans-Pacific Partnership is just another one of these bodies which we can use to shape China's behaviour. But, of course, for China to become a member, it has to conform with what is, in this particular agreement, a very high level of standards to become a participant. But if China can tick all the boxes, we don't want to kid ourselves about this, it's going to be hard for China, but if it can, we should welcome them. And I think the government's position on this should be constructive engagement first, up front, and a welcoming approach, subject to China's ability to meet the requirements of membership.
The US President Joe Biden has urged Australia to tread carefully when it comes to China. Is that wise advice?
Well, my problem with that is that he gave the advice publicly and in a speech. I thought it was gratuitous and totally unnecessary for him to do that. If he wanted to do it in private to the Australian Prime Minister, fine. But come on, I mean, you don't think Australian diplomats who've been dealing with China for decades are not aware of this? Do you think we really do need the gratuitous advice of the US President in public? Our ministers are hard-headed. They're very experienced. Our bureaucrats have dealt with China multilaterally, bilaterally, and in every other forum for decades. So, yes, I mean, we have to be hard-headed and realistic when we deal with China, but we always have been. And so, as someone who's been so involved in the relationship for so many decades, I take exception, frankly, to that sort of gratuitous public advice. But certainly, if the US President wanted to say it privately to the Australian Prime Minister, good on him.
Earlier this year, you told this program that a serious Chinese challenge to preeminence is decades away. Do you still hold that view now that the US is focused and involved in the Russia-Ukraine and Israel-Gaza wars?
Yeah, well, the world has changed a lot, and there are some very significant distractions. But when we're talking about preeminence of the US, I was speaking about military preeminence, and I think that still holds. And I think the US can maintain and will and is maintaining its position in East Asia, whilst it has war on the European continent, and now this new conflict in the Middle East. So pretty much yes, although I think the challenges are significantly greater than they were maybe when we last spoke about this.
Geoff Raby, thank you.
My pleasure.